Hello and welcome to the Coding of Z channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so now. If you get into this video and you like the content, be sure and hit that like. This channel is dedicated towards trying to share information about different facets of information technology. This episode is going to be dedicated towards Blazor, as well as showing how you would integrate Entity Framework Core into the application. This won't hit on any of the real best practices, as the ultimate goal of this video is to lead into the next one to show how you can use Redis in conjunction with your database engine to speed up your responsiveness as well as increase your scalability of your application. So we will ultimately hit on how you use Redis with Blazor, but I think we need to first build up how Entity Framework, if we were only using a database as our backend, how we might be limiting ourselves and our speed of our application for data items that we may be able to cache, even if it's short term, to speed up our client responsiveness, as well as increase our scalability over time. So this is a diagram I showed in a previous video. I'll put that link down in the description. This just shows that you can have a client that can hit the web server, hit your web application or a web service that you have running there. And most times people think of only doing either in-memory caching on your web server or just always going and hitting that database server. But for true scalability, as well as increasing responsiveness in various areas of your application, it's a good idea to use a caching engine or a caching server in the background. In this instance, we're going to be using the Redis server, as it's a very simple and fast caching engine that does the job quite well. Unfortunately, I am going to create just a boilerplate Blazor application to begin with. I know that gets kind of boring if you watch very many Blazor application videos, but for what we're doing, it makes sense. And if you're new to Blazor, this is a good place to start getting a little acquainted with how you would start off with Blazor and how you might accomplish getting Unity Framework into your application. And in the next video, I'll show you how you can get Redis into your application. So we're going to obviously choose a Blazor app. Next. And here we can give it a name. We'll just call it Redis app. It's fine. Hit create, and it's going to ask us if we want to do a Blazor server app or a Blazor WebAssembly app. For this application, we're only going to do a server app. There's quite a few instances where a server app is plenty for what you're going to do. But if you're going to get into something that needs to be highly scalable, I would suggest you go with WebAssembly. I am using .NET Framework 5.0. There's not really much difference between it and 3.1 for what we're going to be showing, but just so you know, this is using Unity Framework or .NET 5 and all those dependencies as well. So let's hit create. And this is just where the Blazor template gets created, and we'll let it get up, and let's just see if this thing will run. And again, this is just the boilerplate Blazor server application, so it's boring. It's got the same stuff everyone always shows, the counter, the weather, fetch data. We won't be using either one of those. So let's jump back here. So the first thing we will want to do is let's get some NuGet packages. And there's a couple of ways to do NuGet packages. The first way is obviously to right click on your project and do manage NuGet packages. Let's go to browse. And the first NuGet package that we're going to want to get is going to be Microsoft.EntityFramework.SQL Server. We'll choose that and choose install. Hit OK and accept. And that's installed. Now our next one, we could do the same thing. We could look for Microsoft.EntityFrameworkCore.tools. But I want to show you as well that you could just simply use your package manager console and just run a command. So I'm going to copy a command from over here because don't want to type all this. So starting up our PowerShell, make sure that the right project is selected here, which we only have the one, but if you did have multiple projects in your solution, you'd want to make sure you choose the right project for your NuGet. And we'll just do a paste and enter. And there we go. So now if we go look at our dependencies, our packages, you can see here we do have both the Entity Framework Core SQL Server and Entity Framework Core Tools, both running at version 5. All right. So the next thing we would want to do is do some scaffolding. So what I've done is I've created a database table. I just used the off-the-shelf AdventureWorks database, but I created a slow data table. And what I did was I populated this table with about 34 million records. And what I'm hoping to do by the end of this video is show you how to pull the data, obviously with Entity Framework, for a query that essentially would look just like this. So if I run this, you'll see here, this query takes 2 seconds to run. There's not any real good indexing on this table or anything like that. Ultimately to only return about 790 records. So I want to be able to use Entity Framework with this table. Well, to do that, I need to scaffold out some models. And you could do this by hand, obviously. You could create your models, your model classes, you could do all that. But the nice thing about Entity Framework Core is it comes with scaffolding tools. What we're going to do instead is, again, we're going to pull up our package manager console down here, and I'm going to type this out just so you have a chance to kind of see what all the parts and pieces are of this. So let's just start off with scaffold DB context. That reminds me, before we can do this scaffolding, I need to go add our database connection to our app settings file. So let's go do that now. So I'm going to open up my app settings. I'm going to do a comma, go down to our next line here in our JSON. And I'm going to copy and paste a connection string in here. So you can see I've got a connection strings, and then I'm adding an AdventureWorks context. And I've got that linked to my SQL Server database with the proper credentials to be able to obviously get to that. So let's jump back to our package manager here. Grows a little bit. So back to what I was saying here is we can do scaffold-db context, and then we're going to do name, and this is going to be the name of our connection. You can actually do just a straight connection string here, but what I've found is I just prefer to go ahead and have our connection string built into our app settings and then just use that. And so we're going to do Microsoft.entity framework.SQL server and then output directory. So I want all my models to go into a models folder within my project. So I can tell it to output the directory to models. And I could let it scaffold the full database, but I'm only concerned right now about one specific table. So I'm going to specify my table here. You could do a common delimited list to do various tables within your database. So I could have space or comma and then table 2, but I only got the one table that I need to worry about. So let's go ahead and hit enter. It's going to build the project. Type something wrong there. Entity Framework Core, not just Entity Framework. Try that again. All right, build succeeded. Awesome. Okay. And so you can see I've got a new folder over here called models, and I've got my database context, and you can look at that if you're curious. Basically just has your structure of your tables, and then I've got my model for my slow data. The one thing I don't like that this does is it does try to pluralize the table structure. So I'm going to rename this thing just because I don't like it. I want that to be data. And yes. And so that'll rename everything to be the way that I like it. Let's save that again. And that gets our scaffolding done. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to add dependency injection for our database connection because we don't want to have to add that everywhere. So I'm gonna close my JSON file because I'm done with that. I'm done with the NuGet packages, and I don't need to see that either. So let's go to our startup project, and this is a common thing. So anytime you're adding things like new services, such as this, where you've got a DB context, you're going to want to add to this file. There's a cleaner way that you can add all of your startup items, and I may show that later on in another video. But for right now, we're just going to add this in here. So we're going to go into our configure services method, and we're going to go services dot add DB context, and we're going to tell it we want to use adventure works context. Let's go ahead and do control period, get our stuff imported, and we're going to have to add some options here. Let's do that. And options dot uses SQL Server. Let's go ahead and get our uses statement in here, if it'll let me. Yep, there we go. And within this, we need to actually bring in our connection string. So we're going to use the configuration object to get connection string, and that's going to be adventure works context. Let's get all that closed out. All right. And that gets our dependency injection for our DB context done. I've already shown you that when we try to run this, even in Query Analyzer, this thing is taking 2 seconds to run. So let's go ahead and get some code that'll actually pull this. So let's go up here to our data folder. I'm just going to reuse this data folder. These are the boilerplate services that are built in. We're going to go ahead and add a new class, and we'll call this class slow data service. And one of the things that we're going to want to do is inject our DB context into this. So let's do private read only AdventureWorks context, and we'll let it be named that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our using statement, and now we can do this and tell it to go ahead and generate our constructor. That'll take care of that for us. So the next thing we want to do is actually have a method that we can call to get a list of results back. So let's do public list of slow data. So that's our model. So that's our type of list that we're going to return. Get slow, and we'll call it datum because we're getting multiples. The next thing we want to do is just do a return, and now we're going to use our AdventureWorks DB context. Let me go ahead and put a underscore here. Just makes it a little easier. Dot slow data. And let's just go down here to the next line, do where. And again, we're just going to basically replicate this query, but in link. So let's do x.firstname.contains, and we'll do Janice. Oops, sorry. x.lastname.contains, and we'll just do am. Let's do to list, and that's done. So that's using Entity Framework DB context to go and get all the records that have a first name that contains Janice or Janik in this situation, if you pronounce that correctly, and then am. All right. So the next step would be to create a page to actually show our results. Okay, so let's add a page. Right click, add razor component, and we'll call this, let's call it fetch names slow data. Okay, and I'm just going to copy and paste this page here just because it's a little easier and you don't have to suffer through me typing. Save that. So that's going to get us our basic structure of our page. So you can see here I've got a button that we can click to load our data. We've got to go add our methods. Those don't exist yet. We've got the structure here. So once we actually have some data, it'll then show a table for each of those records that get returned. So the next thing I want to do is go add in our navigation. I want to add another menu item so we can actually get to this page. So let's go do that. Copy that, paste that in there. And we'll just say this is slow data for the text on the screen. So that takes care of that. Now, when you're adding code to a Blazor web page, you have a couple of choices. One is you can add code down here. I prefer to just go ahead and add it as a code behind. So what we'll do is we'll do add a class, and then you name the class exactly the same as your page, except you'll add a .cs at the end. So we'll just do fetch names slow data .razor.cs, and then you'll see Visual Studio is smart enough to pick up on that. So the first thing you gotta do is change this from public to partial. This is rather short, but I'm still gonna copy and paste it. So I'm just adding all my using statements just to get everything where it'll actually be able to build. And let me pull this back up. So back over here, you saw I was calling on this button click a load datum. And here's my method for load datum. It's simply setting our list to null, creating an instance of our data service, and then calling get slow datum to get all the records based off of our criteria. And so once that's populated, this will no longer be null and it'll display our table. So let's see if this runs. And again, I'm not following best practices. What I'm just trying to do is get to a point where I can show how you would use Entity Framework in conjunction with Redis. So obviously, if we were doing this in real world, we want to break this down into data services along with a repository. And then that way we could have all these in separate layers. But for this purpose, this is perfectly fine. And there you go. So let's try that there. There's our Blazor. So you can see our messages here. There we go. You can see it's downloading now. It's just the way it's redrawing. We're not getting to see that redraw here at this level, which is fine. And that's getting Entity Framework tooled up into this thing. And that's the end of this video. And again, the next video will show you tying in Redis, and then you'll be able to see the difference between when it hits the database to get the data and when it actually has to go and get it from the cache